you don't want to test your AI models using AI generated data, because then that completely skews the results, which goes back to where we were 15 years ago in building something that's now skewing and creating bias in the data that's being used. But now the question for you, Paulina, is, hypothetical. How do you detect what's AI and, created data and what's not?
So, welcome to Bits and Bolts. Today I'm with Melissa Drew, who's very experienced within AI. She works as a Chief AI Trust Officer. She's a keynote speaker, TEDx presenter, author, cancer survivor. So, a woman of many hats, very experienced within the tech, based in the US, worked in multiple high-profile companies and organizations, also podcaster, and currently focusing on trust in AI. And she's also a founder and creator of multiple frameworks for AI. It's great to have you with me here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining.
Yes, you covered everything. It's amazing when someone lists out everything you've done in the last 30 years. It's quite a lot more than what I thought.
That's really a lot. I'm very impressed by your journey, by your experience, and how many stuff you've done. But you started in 90s with your career, if I correctly done my research, and you worked with some databases and booklets and other stuff. But how did you decide that data it's something what is very good to drive our decision, and that's something what can enable decision driven making in the big way in so early as in 90s? Because right now we have AI boom, but I don't think some years ago it was so, it wasn't so hyped, it wasn't so visible.
No, I got into data not by choice. So I was doing my master's degree in management information systems, and I've had to put myself through college. And I was learning, COBOL. This is back before, the 2000s, Y2K. I was learning COBOL. I was learning Visual Basic. Part of management information systems was programming, just as much as it was around telecommunications and networking. And one of the core principles was data. So as a part of that, I started my own company, myself and another individual, and we would go to companies, mostly, insurance, construction, banks, financial institutions, and we would offer to help them look at their data and find where they could maybe cut costs, where they could optimize. We didn't use that word back then, but that's what that is, optimize. And I did what any, business person would do. I created these trifold flyers. I got the yellow pages out because nothing was digital back then. and I sent out all these things through the mail, and just through numbers, I ended up getting clients, and we would build Access and SQL Server databases and pull their data in from different sources and kind of do exactly what most companies do today, only back then it was considered innovative. As a result of that, one of my professors gets grants from the US, from the government. And he said, I'll give you some grant money if you go over to the Alabama Apparel and Textile Company. So it was a pretty well-known company in Alabama at that time, and go do what you're doing. But I want you to, here's the money, do it better. And that was when I built, through a UI on the internet in Cold Fusion and CGI. That was my interface. And then I had MS Access database and SQL databases on the back end. I built these forms. I would collect data from all their suppliers. I would pull it into these databases. I would analyze it, and I would help them understand how to make better informed decisions. And what I didn't know at the time was that was the very first publicly used request for information, which now we use that every day. Request for proposal, request for information, all of that RFXs. So yeah, back in the early 90s, through fortunate of money from the government, that's what ended up propelling electronic databases and collecting information from suppliers. And since then, I just stayed with data ever since. I really liked it. I was good at it, and it carried me forward. In fact, that's what was of interest to Carney. They looked at what I did during my university, and that was why they wanted to hire me, was to focus on doing the same thing for all of their clients globally.
So you were innovator from straight away, as
Mhm.
we can see, and that's
Yeah. Yeah, back then you had to be a developer if you wanted to do anything. Now it's low code, no code. There's all these UIs and interfaces that you don't really have to integrate or work with the developing the code or the mathematics that go behind AI models. But if you wanted
yeah,
to do anything, you had to know how to develop and code.
yeah,
And
totally.
then
And also access to the information is also much easier compared to, even 10 years ago when I was
Mhm.
starting,
Yeah.
versus not even comparing to what was, 30 years ago. You really need to, dig in,
Mhm.
learn everything, find the information and came up with it. So that's, taking into consideration the times, that's even, I
Mhm.
find, that's right now it's much more easier to do all of it versus it was 30 years ago. So the level
Yeah.
and of work and how much you put into it, that's also completely different compared to right now, because right now you have a lot of people who go to AI, code something and they trying to sell it, but I think you
Mhm.
still need to understand what's going on, but they don't have enough knowledge, but because access is so easy, everyone is right now AI guru.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Back then, if you had to build it, and now instead of building it and learning it, now the focus is how do you govern it? How do you make it accurate? How do you make it, reduce the bias? It's all about the life cycle.
Exactly. Challenges are changing and depends on times, but I think the understanding and by people who operate with it should be still focused on compared to it
Mhm.
doesn't matter the times, because you still need to make it secure, need to being able to make product or ready, or being able to enforce it moving forward.
Mhm.
But what was from the other side? Because you came up with data, you came up with a lot of information for the leadership of a lot of companies.
Mhm.
How did what was their reaction towards it? What did they do with it? Because it was not as common as now that we have data about everything and we can do decisions right now about it. How was it when you started to go to the leadership about it with
Yeah.
your findings?
Carney, we had 9/11 in 2001, and all consulting firms pretty much had to lay everybody off. At that moment, disposable income for organizations wasn't around data and optimization and spend. It was all about security, trying to understand not the term cybersecurity, but really understand security, electronic security. But as a result of my job with Carney, this individual from France started a company in Walnut Creek, California, and he was looking for someone that really understood procurement and data and spend, that understood what the consumers wanted in the United States. And so he was building a proprietary grammar-based AI application that had been patented. So it was patented here in the US. And he couldn't finish it because he didn't have the expertise in building what we called the inference engine. So this tool was doing everything I was doing manually. So I would collect all this data and I would pull it in and I would analyze it and I would look at it, and it would take me 60 hours a week, sometimes 90 hours a week, anywhere from 7 to 9 weeks doing it manually for one company to really help them understand, insights into their data. And this guy, and I can't remember his name offhand, but this guy had built using AI to do everything I had done in hours instead of 9 weeks. And he needed somebody that really understood the getting it from point A to point B, and basically everything I did. My job was to be that expert, that expert that helps build out the expert system and that last little piece called the inference engine. They knew how to collect the data. What they didn't know how to do is how to pull the data together. How do you know that this data is, not as good as, say, this data? So I worked with, and back then when you built AI, you had to have a doctorate in mathematics. So my job is to work with these doctors in mathematics and take everything that I was doing and work with them to build it into a mathematical AI model, so that in the end, it truly was doing with levels of confidence exactly what I was doing with Carney manually. And now everybody uses this tool. After the tool was built, we sold it several times to consumers. I stayed on to make sure it was working properly. And then a company called Ariba. Ariba is a cloud procurement system, and they bought it in 2005 to get it off the market because they didn't want any of their competitors to using it. See, back then we were diagnostic, or agnostic. I'm sorry, we were agnostic. We took data from anybody, whether it was a company, whether it was Ariba, whether it was one of Ariba's competitors. We took the data from anybody because that's what our company was. But Ariba saw the value of it and wanted to make sure that no one else on the market had it, so they bought it. Most of the company was disbanded. A few of us, about 10 of us, were carried over to Ariba to help integrate the application. And then shortly thereafter, within a year and a half, 2 years, we all rolled off and did other things. But ever since then, so that was in 2004, ever since then, I've stayed within the AI space. Some companies, really understood AI, really understood some of the applications of RPA, robotics processing, being able to, hey, I've got to click the same button at the same time 100% of the time every time I do this process. Well, great. We can use RPA and we can automate that for you. So in early stages of 2004 to, 2000, yeah, gosh, almost up to 2010, AI was there, but it wasn't there. It was behind the scenes. It was very difficult to use AI because there wasn't the infrastructure or the processing speed that we needed in our laptops or our computers. And I mean, if you really wanted to look at, back then it was terabytes and terabytes of data. Now we're looking at petabytes of data, which I didn't even know what petabytes was until just recently. But we're looking at terabytes of data in the early 2000s. And suddenly the market changed. We went from in 2006, 7, and 8, we were focused on cloud, moving from the cloud. So the industry kind of paused, not really wanting to engage in AI because now suddenly going to the cloud was more important. Security issues. This is when AWS came out and being able to utilize a cloud infrastructure that we'd never heard about before. So suddenly everybody was really not focused on AI. They were focused on other things. And combine that with not having the processing power. um, the things that I was doing in AI behind the scenes was really more of, the automation, process automation, tasks automation. If you had some tools on the market that could take the data and help, classify it, those were important at that time. But most of the AI applications out there were very contained, like this system that I helped build in 2004, and use small sets of data. It really wasn't until 2015 when IBM completely overhauled the processing chip, and suddenly AI was more accessible because anything with AI is all about data. AI sits on this top layer, everything. If you don't have data, you don't have AI. And so that was the challenge we had, not the AI, but the ability to be able to take all this data and then process it. And that didn't happen until IBM came out with their new chips in 2015.
Yeah, that's a huge journey, and I fully agree. Like, I also see that there was full DevOps boom, cloud boom, and everyone was focused on this, especially not on the AI. Also, when I was at uni, almost no one was talking about AI. It was, some niche people who were working with very niche topics within AI and machine learning. But also, cloud boom allowed and new chips and new technologies allowed to refocus on AI, and then open AI came and so on. But that comes also with trust, which you mentioned. I can still, see right now that a lot of organizations and leadership are struggling to trust AI, and also how to get the data which we can have enough confidence in to be able to get the results which we want in the particular application of it. So what do you think about data quality then compared to now? Was it easier or harder to get the data, good data, which we can train our AI on?
I think we're still struggling with that. I did some research a couple years ago on. So I did this research not a long time ago, but maybe 5 years ago, specifically on AI in healthcare. And AI was initially used early on in reading X-rays, but nobody knew it. It wasn't very common. I didn't realize, how long the the FDA had been doing this. And what they discovered is if AI is being used in a medical device or being used to review X-rays, then they called it software as a medical device, so an SMD. And because of that, it required the FDA to review it and approve it. But as you mentioned, nobody really understood data back then, and nobody really understood AI back then. And so what happened is, go back to the quality and the efficacy of data, is they would study, they would do their studies, just like we do with data we have today. You collect data from a lot of demographics and you help build the model. And what you want is you want that model to be able to have outcomes that are balanced across all the data that's coming in. And there was some challenges early on, where when somebody started looking at the data after the fact, 10 years later, they found that they only went and looked at one hospital instead of all the demographics around the United States. And in that hospital, they may have only got data from 12 people, which in
Wow,
the end, that's not a very balanced demographic, and it caused a lot of bias.
that's very
And if
biased small
the
data
if
set.
yeah, and as you can, now that we know this, now I can say, since this is being recorded, that the FDA a couple years ago actually halted and overhauled all of the procedures and requirements for how much data and how much information that you had to use to test these devices in order for it to be now approved. But it wasn't something that we knew about. It wasn't something that was really discussed. Okay. So the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, they were tasked with the safety and effectiveness of AI-driven medical products. And the FDA largely regulates software based on its intended use and the level of risk to the patient. So if the software was intended to treat, diagnose, cure, mitigate, or prevent disease or any other conditions that relied on AI, which was machine learning or deep learning, then the FDA considered it in the US software as a medical device, and it had to go through FDA approval. Now, in 2008 was the first time that we had a software as a medical device, that the FDA cleared those AI algorithms. And it continued on from 2008 to roughly about 2017, when it finally jumped from one FDA signing off on it to 5. And this just meant that we now suddenly had 5, opportunities of software as a medical device. And when you dig into this, all of this is really supporting diagnosis of X-rays, reading those X-rays before it's handed off to the doctor. Now, in 2018, it jumped to 18. In 2019, it jumped to 24. And in 2020, it jumped to 51. Now, if you recall earlier in this conversation, it was around 2015, 2016 when IBM came up with the better processing speeds, really enhanced those chips. That allowed not just companies like IBM to synthesize the data, but that's now what allowed other companies to now have access. So I say that roughly around 2015, AI became more accessible into the public market. And then in 2021, it decreased down to 28, and it continued to decrease because now we had more information about AI. And we realized that when you dig deeper into what the FDA was approving, yes, it was historical or retrospective. It wasn't prospective data or any future randomized study. And only 31% of the companies at that time disclosed how many sites were being used in the data. It was not disclosed how many patients were involved. And for the few that did, it could have been maybe, 300. And those were the ones that did tell you the information, that were transparent with their data. So it was after 2021 that the US FDA, Food and Drug Administration, said, okay, we're going to pause this and completely overhaul it. Can I give you just one more other example?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. There's another example. Give me a second.
So pretty much they changed completely after 2015 when the stuff got published, and then 2021 again, when it got even more information.
Yeah, they did. And it's good though. I mean, it's good because overhauling it in 2021 meant that they really needed to, now that people really understood data and understood bias. And that compared that to now this other example. And this is in the Journal of Medical Science. Early, around that same time frame, 2020, 2021, there was here in the US, we have what's called a transplant list. I'm sure it's global, but it's a transplant list. And that transplant list, when you need a transplant, we'll say this is a liver transplant, you put your name on the list along with all the information around who you are, what's going on with your liver, how much longer do you need, the urgency, are you likely to be able to take the liver and not reject it? And the liver transplant database estimates where you should be on that list and then puts you on the list. And then as your variables change, you could fall anywhere on the top. You could change your position on the list. Well, over time, after a couple years, it was recognized that only white men were on the list in the top 20 for over many years, that nobody else was ever in the top of that list, and they were the ones being prioritized. And someone called this out, and they then looked at the data. This was an AI based software using machine learning, deep learning, all the technologies that we're familiar with today. And it was discovered that when they used data to test it, they only used data that they had available to them, which means they only had at the time data from liver transplants for white men and no other data demographics. Women, they didn't have data on women. They didn't have data on African American or any other demographics. So that was really one of the first times that it became very well, positioned in the public that if you don't have the right data, you end up allowing the opportunity for that AI model to be very biased to only giving you responses to these individuals because that's the data that you use to train the AI. So between what happened with the FDA and what happened with this being published in one of the medical journals, it really overhauled how people were looking at data in healthcare. And healthcare became much more of a focus, as you can tell, because healthcare impacts individuals much more publicly than, say, me using AI, some financial services using AI to determine whether or not I should get a credit card. Those are things that aren't so public, but healthcare was very public. I
Healthcare is
think it's
very
very
visible.
surprising that a lot of people didn't realize that AI was being used all the way back in 2008 for neuroradiology and imaging.
I think people are not aware, how much we use AI, not calling it straightforward AI very often. It only got boomed, so for last 2-3 years when it got, across whole society, everyone get to know what AI is actually, and not just this imaginary thing which we can see in the futuristic movies for people who are not involved in tech. Suddenly, my grandma know what AI is when she had no idea about it before. But regarding biased data, myself, I train triathlon and swimming, and there was a lot of data on how you train people. But all the data were collected, for example, on the white men in the particular age. You don't have any training data for the woman. It's only new thing. The same for the health. How do you train with cycle? How do you train people of different races and so on? So we have this bias, I think, across any data connected to it.
So quality of data, you asked about quality of data, and I don't think I really answered it, or I tried to answer it, but it was really stupid. I mean, I didn't get it right. When I look at quality of data, I don't look at just the data, whether it's accurate, whether it's complete. I tend to think of data and how we store it. And that's the challenge that we face. So I mentioned the word petabytes earlier, and there's studies out there. IDC is one of them, and they follow how much data is being created every year. And when we look at that, think of it this way: every time you and I do a video or a podcast, we push it out into the public ethernet. That is data that's going out there that can be used to train a model somewhere. Every time you upload something onto YouTube or you like something on LinkedIn, or you do a presentation, all of that is data that's now available to being scrubbed and used for testing for AI. And I mentioned the word petabytes. So we, as a human species, we create a lot of data every single year. And in 2025, which is this year, it's estimated that we are going to create 200 plus, so 200,000 plus zettabytes, 200 zettabytes per day. So to put the word zettabytes, because that's such an abstract,
That's
number.
insane.
Yeah, so 1,000 gigabytes is 1 terabyte, and then 1,000 terabytes is a petabyte, and then we go to exabytes, and then finally we get to zettabytes. And whoever comes up with these names realized a while ago that data is just exponentially increasing every single year globally. So now we have new terms like yottabytes, and I understand that there's 2 other terms even above that because of the amount of data that we collect worldwide. So data quality has not, in my opinion, improved since we first started working this in, let's say, 1990s. If anything, it's gotten worse only because of the amount of data and the type of data that we're collecting. It's video, it's images, it's unstructured data. There's data out there that companies are collecting that they don't even know they have, or they've collected it and they've stored it, but they're not using it. That's a whole nother, conversation on dark data. So no, to the short answer, the short answer is roundabout, but the short answer is data quality is not anywhere close to where it should be, even after 30 years of working in data. If anything, it's gotten worse. And that's solely because of the amount of data and the types of data that we collect.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. And now you also have a problem that you haven't had before. You have AI generated data. Uh,
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's a great one. I forgot about that one. That's a whole nother issue that companies are trying to figure out how to deal with at their companies. And you don't want to test your AI models using AI generated data, because then that completely skews the results, which goes back to where we were 15 years ago in building something that's now skewing and creating bias in the data that's being used. But now the question for you, Paulina, is, hypothetical. How do you detect what's AI and, created data and what's not?
y-
That's a whole nother
yeah,
comment. I don't know the answer to that
that's
one yet.
that's whole another conversation. I think some of them we can recognize, but some of them, they do this bunch of different tests when it's hard to figure out if it's a human or if it's human generated data or human generated content, or is it AI?
There's some companies out there that I've spoken to who are so concerned with AI generated data and the use of their models that they have policies at the moment that say when you're testing your AI, you can't use any data that's been generated in the last 3 years because they can't tell what's AI and what's not. That's challenging. You get a study, you have no idea if the study was leveraging AI behind the scenes or if it was using AI generated questions. um, I use, what about my LinkedIn page? I used AI to help me refine it. Technically, you shouldn't be using any information from my LinkedIn about page because part of that was AI generated. So I understand the fear. And other companies have tried to deal with it in different ways, but most of them are coming up with these policies that of X amount of years, and the average right now has been 3. You can't use the data.
Yeah, totally. But we cannot go with it forever also. So are we gonna, learn how to recognize that it's AI generated data? Or we need to learn how to use it in the training, and not get stuff, because I mean, it's technology move forward. So you want to be
Yeah.
able to get also data to training, which is newer and it's from new research and from collected in the current years, not only because the other one is getting outdated with time as well. What?
Yeah, I love your observation that the policy it's got to be temporary, because as we move forward, we're going to create more and more AI generated data, and we're going to have to learn how to absorb that and integrate it and be able to decipher it and understand what it means. Um, We're not there yet, but that's a really good observation.
Yeah, that's something what I guess we are working on. But also with AI and a lot of data and a lot of processing, we're coming into another aspect which influence right now sustainability. And, at least in Scandinavia, where I'm based in Denmark and in Europe, there's a lot of focus. Okay, how do we make software more sustainable? How do we make data centers more sustainable? And when AI boom coming and, kind of completely turn it upside down, I don't know how the situation looks in US. And
Mhm.
do you have any focus on it, or companies not really don't really look at it at all? They more focused on the development of AI.
I think within the last 2 years, companies have realized that AI is fantastic, but as we mentioned earlier, if you don't have data, you don't have AI. It doesn't matter if you're doing AI or not, you still have to go back and focus on the data. And within the last couple years, at the federal level, there's been some policies that have stated we need to have a chief data officer in every agency within the government. And that's been happening and rolling out for the last, let's say, 3 years. And then just recently, within the last, say, year and a half, the government added another policy that said, okay, now we need to have an AI officer in every single agency working with that chief data officer, and in some cases it's the same person, in some cases it's not. But I met a few military folks at a conference in DC last year, and it's still fairly brand new. There was a guy who was the data and AI officer for his agency, but he also was doing it for two other agencies as an interim because they couldn't hire enough people. There wasn't there wasn't enough individuals with the experience that they needed just to support the government requirements. Now take that out and your question, expand that into the public. You've got the Fortune 500, you've got the, global top 2000. All of these companies are in demand of having somebody with a background in data or AI or just data. And there's not enough people out there with that level of experience. So it's creating a gap. At least what I've seen in the US. I think the same thing has applied from the few companies I've worked with. I've worked with companies in China and Asia Pacific. They're very focused and keen on those resources. They tend to invest and spend more money on those resources. But then when you look at, Central and Eastern, Central, and Western Europe, so all of Europe, I've worked with folks in London and in the UK and France, Belgium, Amsterdam, and all of them are very much in similar space. But I'm curious what you think, because you're physically in Europe. I'm not.
I think it's the same. There's huge demand for how many people there's required, and with bigger, with more senior experience. I think there's a lot of people with, entry level knowledge and experience, but we still need people who can, manage it. And there's people organizations
Yeah.
are eager to invest into it, but they're also the demand is not met, versus what is needed. And then it's even harder to go, into nitpicking like sustainability or regulations connected to it to be able to apply towards it.
Right. So one of the things that I've been doing is, we call it fractional. It, it's just another term for interim or part-time or um a contractor. But I'll go into companies and I'll be there sometimes for a year part-time, or sometimes, 6 months full-time, really focused on building them what that data organization looks like, helping them understand the maturity of the resources over 4 years, getting them to where they want to be, looking at their infrastructure and assessing the technical landscape, hiring the resources, and in a lot of cases, training my replacement, a full-time person who could come in and take it over. The challenge that I've found is there's resources out there that can maintain, but there's not enough resources out there that can build. And so where I've kind of fallen into this niche is going out and helping build, which, you mentioned early on the frameworks, which is where these frameworks have come to fruition. but I'm interested in your perspective as well.
In my perspective, generally, not only in AI, I have also background from cloud and DevOps
Yeah.
and platform engineering. And in general, in my opinion, usually you don't have enough people to be able to build something. It's much easier to train people to maintain something.
Yeah.
So I think this problem, it's more across whole IT domain,
Okay.
not only within AI. That's the issue which I see. But for the frameworks, is it AI frameworks which you mentioned you work with, like Capture, AIRE, Trail, or other frameworks? It allows you at least, compared to other organizations, show you, okay, where are you? And where can you get better in what perspectives? And it's easier usually to show it to management of the organization and convince them, okay, you should invest into particular aspects of the IT. If it's
Right.
processes, is it tech, is it training of the people, which can bring particular benefits? Because at least that's my experience.
Mhm.
I don't know how you use frameworks in your daily work, or how it helps you to get the outcomes you're looking for.
So the frameworks that you mentioned, those are mine. Those are my frameworks that I've built and that I now apply. Um, you mentioned in the introduction the capture framework. The capture framework is used to assess um, whether or not a third party, whether a supplier, if a supplier says that they're using AI in their products and their solutions, I leverage my capture methodology to really assess and ensure that that's what they're doing. So it focuses on suppliers that have AI powered solutions, products, or services. And through that methodology, it guides the individual to really understand, is it true? Because here in the US, we had several lawsuits about 3 years ago where suppliers claimed they were using AI and then it was discovered that they weren't. But yet they were selling that product as an AI powered, goods and services. And so there was a lawsuit and they lost. That then, back to the whole trust, that eroded trust across every industry, every supplier. So 3 suppliers get sued, and that really frightens everybody because now nobody knows if you say you've got AI, are you really using it? And a lot of folks on the buy side, you've got the sell side of the supplier, the buy side, really didn't understand how to evaluate these goods and services, what questions to ask. And someone such as myself, who had actually built some of this stuff in the early 2000s, I took all of that information along with modern day technology and infrastructure and built out that capture methodology and framework.
A lot. That's a lot of information, and that's a lot of experience which you can translate into life and working with it, and how to
Hmm.
help your customers to deal with it. But do you find that the other frameworks can help you, for example, to collaborate with your customers? Because you mentioned the companies which got sued over and being able to capture it, and how you can show it within your capture framework. But I can see you work with much more frameworks. Do you think it's
They're all
only
mine.
particular as yeah,
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 those are all
these
mine
are.
too. So the capture framework is if you think about it chronologically, the AIRE
Mhm.
framework is AI readiness assessment. That's what it stands for, AI readiness assessment. Because before you go out, and so the problem was, that's great, Melissa. You've helped us understand how to evaluate, suppliers. But we ended up going with the wrong supplier because we had the wrong use case. And so I had to go back to the very beginning of this life cycle. How do you ensure that you're getting the right use case, the AI use case that has the data that's available, the data that's accessible? Sometimes it's available, but we can't access it. Looking at the data quality, looking at all the things that we've talked about before, and then ensuring it's the right use case, that it can be scaled and properly you know, exploited, whether it's internal or external. So I went back and I created this 3-tiered program, AI readiness assessment, specifically on the use case identification. And this guarantees, so it takes all the guesswork out of it. It guarantees you that you are using the right UA. This is the right one to go for. And then from there, Now you go out to your suppliers, and then now you know that once you pick that supplier, you've got the pairing. You've got the right use case as their priority, whether you're looking at it for the very first step, the minimum, viable product, and then you've picked the right supplier that is doing what they're supposed to be doing, and you marry those two together, and then you've got the perfect scenario.
So we are able to find a need with the supplier. So when you're covering end-to-end
Yeah.
whole process.
Yeah.
So you fighting
So, yeah.
in AI, but you also fought in your private life, and you describe yourself as a warrior. Sorry, not cancer
Mhm.
survivor, cancer warrior. It's close to me, as I had myself cancer diagnosis some years ago, and I know how big it can influence your life and journey,
Sure.
not only personally but also professionally. How did this journey influence your perspective for life, both in private and in professional way?
Okay. So I use the term cancer warrior very specifically. I don't like the word survivor. I never liked the word survivor. It makes me feel like a victim, and I don't see myself that way. So I labeled myself as a cancer warrior. In 2022, I was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. And after a year long of battling that, I made some changes personally. I have 2 kids. They're twins. They're 15. They'll be 16 New Year's Eve, and I realized that life is a lot shorter than I thought. I always kind of told myself I was going to live forever. Still want to live forever, by the way. I'm not sure how to do it, but I still want to live forever. But I realized that I needed to have better experiences with my kids. Not quality, not many, but just better experiences where we can share stories after it happens. And sometimes that's just sitting up all night long until 2 o'clock in the morning and playing, board games or teaching them how to play, gin rummy, which I did. Um, and then other times, like this summer, I spent the last 2 years, as soon as I got over my, cancer, um, I spent 2 years planning the vacation of a lifetime, something that I'd always wanna do, which was take 22 days off. Like, wow, that's pretty ambitious. 22 days off, and I spent, most of it in Italy, and then I spent a good week in central France. And I took my kids with me, and we've got tons of stories that we share, and we constantly talk about it. And then sometimes it's outside weeding in the garden. It's a variety of things, but it's really focused on the experiences because I know I won't be around, and I want them to have things that they can look back on that 3 of us did together, personally.
That
That's how
that's
it
big.
impacted personally. Yeah.
That's huge. I think
Yeah.
personally, I had something similar when I wanted to have great moments with people who are the closest to me. Uh,
Mhm. There's always, in the back of your head, they always tell you that it's possible they can come back. But then, I speak to a lot of people in these cancer, once a month we have these cancer groups. And there are women in there that had cancer 20 years ago, that were worse with diagnosis, and they're good to go. They're up and running and haven't had a problem. So, yeah, you always have this positive front and very thick positive front, but really, really far back in the back of your head, there's just this little tiny kind of, fly in your ear that says, there is this chance. So,
oh,
yeah, it's changed the way I think about my health. It's changed the way I think about um, stress. It's changed the way I think about relationships, mostly my kids. But just you've said that you're familiar with it. Um, 1 in 8 people get breast cancer, and I don't carry the gene, and we went back and looked at all the women about 8 generations back, and none of us have breast cancer or ovarian cancer. So, I am one of those lucky 1 out of 8 that got it, but we're still not sure how women get cancer if they don't have the gene or if they don't have a hereditary, background. One day we'll find out, and then maybe I'll know why, but that's always been a question, like, how did I get it if I don't carry it? Um, I'm gonna tell you what my kids have. So my kids are 15, and last year they took biology in ninth grade, and one of them comes up to me and says, "I think I figured out how you got cancer." Oh, okay, this is great. So enlighten me. And she says, we learned in biology that a cell divides and it could be a bad cell. And if that bad cell divides, that's how you get cancer. But there's other things in your body like the police. And when a bad cell divides, the police come over there and they were able to get rid of it so that it won't continue to divide and become bad and cancer. We think that your police were sleeping, and that's why your cancer cell just kind of exponentially kept going and going. And I I thought, not only is that the simplistic term that I've ever heard, but I love it because the way they explained it, everybody has bad cells that divide. Everybody, it's always happening in your body, but your body is this beautiful structure that knows how to remove the bad things that happen in your body. And so I love the perspective they had where, my guys were just on vacation or sleeping because they let those cells kind of run away and grow into something that it shouldn't have been. Other than that,
That's
we have no real reason why.
But sometimes the simplest explanation is the
Love it.
closest to possible one, and that your
Yeah.
kids came up with it only on the biology school after biology classes.
Yeah.
That's beautiful and that's great. And the simplicity, it's not. After my diagnosis, I read ton of research, and the closest what I came to was that it was very stressful period of my life in my early 20s, which turned to this, and me not being able to deal with heavy emotions connected to the heavy events in my life. And
Mm-hmm.
probably my body wasn't, as you're saying, it make police sleep, or it make also police attacking you, my body. So,
Yeah.
it's, I don't think it's very complicated. But I think we're also running out of time a
Okay.
bit. And as we have another recording for your podcast planned just after, so I have one more question for
Yeah.
if you could share one message to people taking into consideration your whole experience and knowledge about AI, trust in AI, tech, data, what would it be?
It's really not one, it's kind of a combination. So if you look at my journey, it was the early 90s that I worked with data. Then yeah, I started working with AI in 2004, but cloud technology happened in 2007. We didn't really see processing chips happen in 2015. We're going to have more disruption, and we're going to have it way more often than we had it before. And it's not going to be big disruptions like what we had, data and the internet and then cloud and then these were big ones, and it was really obvious when we had them on the map. Nowadays, we're getting all these disruptions, but they're smaller, but they're happening more frequently. And we have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And the individual, that's out there listening to this, you're going to have to be able to adapt to new technologies, new terms. For example, generative AI didn't exist as a term until, 4 or 5 years ago. Agentic AI became a term a couple years ago. These are things that you have to be an ongoing lifetime self-learner. Because if you don't, you'll never be able to continue to adapt and navigate with where we're headed in the future. No, for me, the only way I've been able to get where I am is to constantly be learning what's next. And what's next out there in the marketplace is quantum. And we haven't even started really focused on quantum. I did a presentation in quantum in Israel in 2000, well, before the war. That was the first time on the international stage that we were talking about quantum utilized in an organization, just as we utilize databases. So there's still so much more that we're going to experience. And there's so much more out there that we don't even know what that technology is yet because it hasn't been invented. So for me, the number one thing is to become this this self-learner, constantly learning new things, being able to be flexible to adapt because we're going to have to pivot. Pivoting within your your professional journey is going to be just as important as being adaptable and flexible. I mean, if I had to narrow it down to those two root things, you can get those two things right, everything else above it will fall into place.
Yeah, and the world is only changing faster and faster. So you need
It
to
is,
being able
yes.
to adapt even more and even faster pace compared to previous times and generations. But thank you. Thank you for the talk. Thank you for a lot of information. I learned a lot.
Oh. Well, thanks for letting
Hope
me talk. I realized a couple times I talked like a lot, so
you have great experience and knowledge and a lot to share and teach people. I think I learned a lot within this short time. So I'm sure people
that
learn
was the
also a
other
lot.
thing I changed after the diagnosis. I wrote every methodology down and I'm willing to share it. So yeah, that's the other part, sharing, knowledge sharing, letting other people get the knowledge that they don't have to reinvent themselves. Yeah.
Helping
Maybe we
people.
could do
I'm
something
also
together in the future.
yeah, totally. Let's try. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the patience.